Hello and welcome to our next lecture on auditing evidence, specifically the qualitative characteristics of evidence. With evidence, we can go back to the third fieldwork standard of the generally accepted auditing standards. This fieldwork standard requires that we obtain sufficient appropriate evidence to support the audit opinion that we issue as auditors. So we have two things, sufficient and appropriate evidence. So the sufficiency and the appropriateness is what we're concerned with here. So with sufficiency, we have a few different things that lead us to believe that a particular piece of evidence is sufficient or a particular group of evidence is sufficient. We're looking at the quality and the types of the evidence. Then we're looking at where that evidence fits in the overall hierarchy of evidence. In other words, what weight should we give to it? And then we can get down to the quantity of evidence and really the mixture. The mixture, what I'm talking about there, is kind of back with the hierarchy. So we have X number of pieces of evidence. Some are high level, some are low level. So overall, kind of an aggregate or even a weighted average, what level of evidence do we have? So that's sufficiency. And then the appropriateness really boils down to two different things, the relevance of that evidence and the reliability of it. So when we talk about that level of sufficiency and appropriateness that evidence has, that determines how persuasive that evidence is in order to support our opinion and findings. So when we have to defend our opinion or defend our work papers, we're going to have to lean on that evidence, rely on that evidence, because that's what we used to make that determination. Now, of course, the evidence is not all included in the auditor's opinion. The auditor's opinion itself is pretty brief, but if this ever comes up in a quality review or in a legal defense, we need to make sure we have enough evidence to support it. Whether we accepted the financial statements as is, whether we required adjustments, whatever the case may be. Remember, as auditors, that we are ultimately trying to get reasonable assurance about the accuracy of the financial statements and the fact that they are free from material misstatement. So to do that, we need this evidence to be able to get to that point where we can provide an opinion. Now, we talk about the hierarchy of evidence in another lecture, but I'm just going to give a high-level overview here, and we'll walk through some of these just in a couple of slides. So the hierarchy of audit evidence, one of the highest pieces that we could have is just the auditor's personal knowledge and their observation of something, because at that point it becomes a fact. They've seen it. There's no question about the source of that information. The auditor is supposed to be independent. If they're reviewing something or viewing it, observing it, then that's pretty high evidence. External documentary evidence is very close, assuming that the external party is one that we can rely on, and that's a key thing. It has to be unrelated to the current client that we're auditing, the auditee, so to speak. So if it's external documentary evidence and we have no reason to believe it's misleading or misstated, then that's pretty strong evidence. The next level down would be internal client-provided documentary evidence. So it's still written evidence, but the problem is that it's from the party that we're auditing. So there's reason to believe that it may not be fully objective. There may be things missing. Not always. We're not always saying they're trying to commit fraud or anything like that, but we have to have professional skepticism. We have to really question what they've given us. Then we can get down to analytical procedure evidence. So with analytical procedures, this is basically where we're calculating ratios or doing some comparisons to determine whether we think the results make sense or whether they're out of line with something that's happened in the prior year or the industry standard, anything like that. It's not perfect, but it's something we can use to determine whether or not we think there's a problem. And then ultimately at the bottom is testimonial evidence. And when we talk about testimonial, we're generally talking about information from within the company. Somebody is giving us, or we're interviewing them, they're giving us some verbal responses. So we'll talk about all of these in a little bit more detail here. Again, the auditor's direct observation. So we've observed something, we've physically examined it, we've inspected it. Sometimes we're going to recalculate amounts. We may reperform certain tasks. So all of these things are done by the auditor. So there's more reason to believe we can trust them. So external documentary evidence. Now, here's the question that we have to ask when we're dealing with documentation from an outside party. Was it sent directly to the auditor from that outside source? In other words, did the provider, did the client, the auditee not even get the chance to touch it? Because if it comes straight to us, then again, there's more reason to believe we can trust it. If it was sent from a third party to the client, to the auditee, and then it's passed on to us as auditors, yes, we could validate it perhaps by going to that third party, but just at first glance, there's just a little bit more of a reason to be concerned. Again, it's not saying every company is going to commit fraud and try to change that documentation in some way. If they do, that's a completely different situation. But there's still just that question in your mind. Again, professional skepticism. So we could be talking about examples of a bank statement, invoice from a third party. If these go to the client first and then they come to us, depending on the situation, if something seems unusual, maybe we want to go to the bank or to that third party and just verify it. Internal client provided documentary evidence. If this is something that we really have no way of verifying from a third party, if it's just coming from the client, accounts receivable subsidiary ledgers or schedules, depreciation schedules, fixed asset subsidiary ledgers. The question is, can we rely on it? Do we have any way of corroborating this from a third party? Does it make sense? Do the amounts you're seeing, does the documentation you're seeing make sense, or does something look out of line? That is what you generally get from experience in audit. You start to see things as you expect them, and then if something looks a little unusual, you can question it that way. Analytical procedure evidence. So these analytical procedures are used at a few stages in an audit. A lot of times they're used in risk assessment and planning. They are also used at the very end as kind of a wrap-up to see if your adjusted numbers still make sense. But they can also be used in substantive tests of details as well. One example of this would be simple ratio analysis. We're comparing two or more numbers that should have a reasonable relationship, and we're looking at what that result is this year compared to last year or compared to an industry standard. Now, the thing with this, though, is it either raises a flag or leads us to have a little bit more comfort about a number or about something that's been reported. There might be certain things that are illogical or impossible. In other words, the calculation may show something that just makes no sense. Something's negative when it just flat out can't be negative. Something's higher than another number when it just doesn't make sense. In those situations, it proves an error. If you could prove that this just flat out can't happen, then it proves an error. But it's harder for something to prove that there are no errors whatsoever. You can generally prove an error because now you found it, but it's hard to prove that no error exists. It might help to provide a little bit of limited assurance that everything seems to be all right, but it's just harder for this type of evidence to prove that we can accept it. It can prove that we can reject a number and have to revise it, but it can't really prove very well that we can accept a number. Now, that testimonial evidence that I talked about, this is generally, we're talking about something coming from the client, oral or verbal information. When I say it's not always permanent, that means it's not in writing, it's our notes. Maybe it could be a recording, depending on the situation. Recording notes of what was said, but it's not really in writing, it's not from a third party, it's from this client. Again, it comes from the client. If we can corroborate what they've told us, then hey, all of a sudden that has more weight. If what they've told us can be verified from a third party or verified from external documentary evidence, then that just builds a bigger picture that makes more sense. Now, again, even though testimonial evidence is the lowest on the scale, it's still important because it can fill in some of the gaps. It can help explain things. It can help point us where to go to find more information. It starts to paint the picture, and then we know what we might want to corroborate. But there might also be situations where we can just use testimonial evidence and no corroboration if we just needed limited assurance on a particular item. In other words, if there really wasn't much risk to begin with, then maybe this testimonial evidence is enough to mitigate that little bit of risk. But the point here is, remember professional skepticism? We always want to critically analyze what's being told to us or what's being shown to us. So ask yourself whether what you're hearing makes sense. If it doesn't, ask deeper questions. Expand the interview, broaden the interview. Don't be afraid to ask a question that you think perhaps you should know the answer to. That's one of the most important examples we got out of the Enron financial accounting scandals from back in the early part of the century, and some other scandals at the same time, was that sometimes the auditors just didn't ask the questions because they didn't want to look stupid. They assumed, hey, maybe I should know how this works. Maybe I should know the answer to this question, but for some reason I don't. So they basically said, hey, I'm not going to bother asking the question. I'll just assume it's right. The problem is, it certainly was not right. It was intentionally made so complex that the auditors, most of them, couldn't understand what was going on. So ask questions. So back to the appropriateness, the relevance of the information. That's one element of appropriateness. Does it pertain to the audit objective we are trying to accomplish? So we first need to know, what audit objective are we trying to accomplish? This kind of goes back to the management assertions discussion from an earlier lecture. Are we trying to prove that the list of something is complete? Are we trying to prove that everything on that list exists? What are we trying to prove? Are we trying to prove that the value is correct? So we need to know the audit objective we're trying to accomplish, and then take a look at this piece of evidence. Does that help us prove that that item exists? Does it help us prove that nothing is missing from the list? Reliability is the other aspect here. And again, to some extent, this goes back to the hierarchy as well. How much trust can we place? And perhaps more importantly, how much trust would others place in that evidence? So what I mean by that is, if this did go to a court, if we were being sued and we had to defend our work, would others place the same amount of trust in that evidence as we did? Are the various levels of evidence that we are getting consistent with one another? If we see two pieces of evidence that are inconsistent, one does not corroborate the other, in fact it tells you a different story, we really have to question what's going on here. Why would these two things tell us two different things about the same situation, the same entry, same transaction? That should raise a very big red flag. And first you need to find out which one would you be most likely to trust, but more importantly, why is the other one telling you something different? So you're going to dig into some more detail there. Again, the relevance. Consider the objective under review, but notice that we have to know what that objective is, because evidence may be relevant to one objective, but not relevant for another. For example, if we were looking at a sales transaction, so we're wanting to know, do all these sales that this company has reported, do they exist? Are they legitimate? If we get an invoice for one of the sales that's on that list, or if we get the entire collection of sales, then hey, that's perfectly fine. That tells us that all of those items exist. So that's the existence assertion. But if we were trying to prove that nothing was missing from that listing for some reason, maybe we were concerned that this company has shifted some of these sales to a later period, even though that's not a common situation that a company would want to move sales to later. It does happen, especially if they've already hit their targets for this year. They may not want to set the bar too high, so they may be trying to shift some sales to a later year. But the problem is that invoice, or even a selection of invoices, wouldn't be relevant at all to the completeness assertion, because if we're concerned that they have perhaps missed some invoices, then getting the list of invoices they've showed us is not going to help us, because of course those invoices are already on the list. We need to find out which invoices may not be on the list, which ones may be missing, intentionally or unintentionally. So a better type of evidence that might be more relevant to the completeness assertion might be cash collections from a later period. Look at the accounts receivable collections from the next period. If we see that payments are coming in that really related to a sale back in this period that they did not report for some reason, that's more relevant evidence to that objective. So you just have to really tie it to what objective you're talking about there. Now, when we get to the reliability aspect here, a very important thing is the independence of that information provider. Who's giving us that evidence? Who's giving us the information? If it's a third party that this company is just a small customer of that third party, doesn't really have much control over that third party, then we consider it much more independent. We're much more likely to trust that third party, because what reason would they lie to us? They have nothing to gain by lying to us. The effectiveness of internal control, if we can rely on that company's internal control, then it leads to more reliable information. The auditor's direct knowledge, if we know something to be true, if we've seen it, we've observed it, then again, that is more reliable. The qualification of the information providers, so not only are they independent, but they're also knowledgeable about that industry, so we can trust the information more. The degree of objectivity, that kind of goes back to the independence. Independence and objectivity are very similar concepts. It means that somebody has no real reason to lie to us. They don't have any strong relationship with this client, so they're objective. They can tell you the facts. Timeliness. We'd rather have the information soon rather than later. The later that information is, the less, really, this kind of goes back to relevance more than reliability, but the later this information comes to us, it might be less relevant, but it also may be less reliable as well. So in other lectures, we do go into further detail about some examples, some specific types of evidence that can be used in an audit, but this should just set the stage for the overall qualitative characteristics that we're looking for in evidence. Some things to think about as you're going through an audit, as you're gathering evidence. What matters to your audit? And what should you really be thinking about? Can you trust this information or not? So hopefully this helps to get you through that initially. I thank you for your time, and I will talk to you in the next session.